Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of our town hall series. If you're just joining us, my name is Ariana Belizzi, and I'm the executive director for the Federation of Community Councils. Just a little background on the FCC for our newbies. We were formed in 1976 to support community councils in getting citizens actively involved in the government process. The FCC has served many roles to the councils of our municipality, and the purpose of this series was to hit 2 particular mission goals: outreach and training. Less than 5% of residents are signed up to get notices from their councils, which means most constituents are not getting a chance to hear what decisions are being made in their community, and we mean to change that. At our last town hall, we had over 60 participants online and in person, and over 120 people have watched the recording we had on YouTube. We at the FCC want to help our neighbors understand that their opinion is important in deciding the future of Anchorage. If you are here today or listening online, I encourage you to send the video of our last session to one friend or family member who is not familiar with community councils. Today's speakers are going to help you have a better understanding of what goes on in a community council meeting. I know when I got involved in my council, I was confused and overwhelmed by the language, the structure, and the people in the room. Our speakers are going to help make that space more accessible so that you can go in feeling confident in articulating your opinion. For our in-person audience, if you have picked up a card when you entered, feel free to write down any questions you find yourself asking for our speakers, and we'll collect them before the Q&A session. If you are online or watching the recording, we do have one more session in November, which is a great chance for you to come in person and ask your questions. Before we dive into the program, I'd like to thank everyone who helped make today possible and this entire series possible: the Anchorage Assembly and the Municipal Ombudsman's Office, our speakers for sharing their insights today, and my amazing staff and volunteers. And finally, thank you for spending another Monday with us. So first up, we have Harry Need. I invited Harry today because Robert's Rules is both the bane and the savior of meetings. Learning to navigate and use the rules are a skill that Harry has spent years honing. Harry is an exhausted father of a 6-year-old, a volunteer rabble-rouser, and a 20-year ski patroller, a VW van knuckle-banger, and an aspiring fly-fishing guru. He has a master's degree in public administration from UAA and is a doctoral student in education leadership at the University of Oklahoma. In addition to working as the Senior Director of Philanthropic Services for the University of Alaska Foundation, Harry also serves as the Development Committee Chair for the Alaska Center Education Fund, the Division Legal Advisor and National Legal Committee Liaison for the Alaska Division of the National Ski Patrol, and Vice President of the South Edition Community Council. Before his current service, he was president of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, Alaska Chapter, Anchorage Estate Planning Council, and the Fairview Community Council. His claim to fame is that he has rewritten the bylaws of every organization he has served. Please welcome Harry Need.
Thank you. I was asked to speak on Robert's Rules, mostly because I think we shared a coffee some time ago, and I kind of expressed my dismay on how wed people are to Robert's Rules. So I'm the anti-Robert's Rules speaker for you tonight. I guess it's useful to talk about what Robert's Rules is good for before I start trashing it, but it is pretty useful. It started. There's this general. My understanding is that there's this general like 1860 something, 1867, who was asked to attend a public meeting and realized that there was no real parliamentary decorum at this public meeting, and he was dismayed. And so he went home and wrote out all these rules and then proceeded to trumpet them at other public meetings until he had them refined and he had figured out a way for public discourse to happen in an orderly manner. And I think that rules is good for, is getting into an item of business and getting out of it, and generally trying to get some orderly discussion in between. I think that, so from the perspective of a community council member, what is useful? I guess I would start with the agenda. Having an agenda, and there's some handouts in the back, and so I'll refer you to, I think the first one is this larger packet, the Parliamentary Procedure 101. If you're running a community council meeting, I think it's useful to have an agenda, have it published in advance. Make sure that if there's anything major happening, you're giving your neighbors ample time to consider what those items are going to be. That agenda generally follows the same, so we're on page 3 of that 101 document. Generally follows the same sort of lineup for every meeting. And so there's a call to order. Generally you'll figure out if there's enough people in the room to make quorum. The quorum is going to be established by your bylaws. Usually that's a set number for a big group. If there's a smaller group like an executive committee, it's going to be a majority. Typically, but it's in the rules. It'll be in your bylaws. It'll set up the minutes. So this is the history of the last meeting. You'll have officers and standing reports, committee reports, special orders, unfinished business, new business, and then the best part of the meeting, which is like actual dialogue, and then the adjournment. So here's the trick. As a chair of a community council is to preserve as much time as you can for actual dialogue, to try to get the minutes and a lot of the things that are consent items teed up and disposed of as quickly as possible, to expedite the officers' reports, any committee reports, special guests. I think, just kind of special caveats here with community councils in mind is that often you'll have representatives of the fire department or the police department or school board members or folks that frankly have other things to do that night. And so I often try to get them as up to the front of the agenda. So, somebody would move to amend the agenda. We'd get the fire department up and out of there as quickly as possible. Same thing for the police department, get them back on the street. I think the officer's report is worth noting too, because if you're chairing this meeting or if you're an officer, there's an opportunity here to add a little bit of commentary. And I think this is one of the things that Robert's Rules lacks is the mission moments, reminding people why you're together, why you gather, what's important, what the vision is for your neighborhood, where you've been. And so these officers' reports, especially as chair, creates a moment where you can kind of set the tone. You can remind people that, we're neighbors. We're here to accomplish something. We're here to have some dialogue tonight. We have a couple tough topics tonight. We're going to try to get through them as orderly as possible, but what we really want to do is make sure that everybody can engage. So that's page 3. I think on page 12, you'll see more information on the parliamentary procedure, is the motion in order. And then I think it's useful to look at page 6, which is presenting the motion. So what's a motion? A motion's just, this is the thing we're talking about. Somebody would first obtain the floor. So you're going to wait for the previous speaker to finish. So as chair, you're going to allow the dialogue to conclude for whatever the previous item was. Somebody will ask to be addressed. The chair's responsibility is to, then address that person. They'll state who they are, what they want. The motion, in Robert's Rules is fairly formalized. I move to blah, 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 blah. Or I move that we do not, or whatever. And then you open it up well, and then you look for a second. You want to make sure that it's not, this isn't just one person's opinion, that, somebody else in the room agrees that that's the sort of thing you ought to talk about for the next few moments. And then as chair, your job is to allow the community to have that dialogue. There are a variety of ways that you can go about this, but this is where I start to derivate a little bit from Robert's rules. I think that there's a place for a highly structured conversation. There's a place for the strict adherence to rules, and then there's a place like a community council meeting where at the end of the day we're volunteers, we're neighbors, we're trying to come to some sort of sense of consensus and growth together. Where I think it's important to draw out some voices, or if there's somebody in the room that needs to talk on something, giving that person space. I think there's also a space for using the rules to ensure that the loudest voice isn't dominant. And that can be accomplished a variety of ways. I think that you can set time limits for a debate, or you can say that you want to limit people to a certain amount of time per speaking. Primarily, the way I like to see it is that you allow for, you ask that people don't speak a second time until everybody else has spoken once. And the bane of a community council meeting for me is when a dialogue turns into a debate and you have somebody responding to one or two people, and then it's just a back and forth at the expense of everybody else in the room who may also have other questions. And so where there's a need to curtail that, where there's a need to draw out other voices, I think that's where Robert's Rules is a little bit more useful, in the sense to be able to kind of stop a conversation that should be more structured. But it's a give and a take. The other side of this is that you also want to allow for some dialogue. That this isn't, especially in a community council environment, it's not a highly formalized legal atmosphere. You're trying to actually have a dialogue with your community, and this is your best shot at it. So, I think there's a balance there. So let me just kind of point you to some other things that I think Robert's Rules is good at. So starting the meeting, getting an attendance so you can actually figure out who's in the room, who's excused. Approving the consent agenda so you can get into the business quickly. If you do need to make a binding decision or some sort of finality to an issue, then it's nice to be able to have an opportunity for a formalized vote. I think, again, keeping that order during more controversial discussions, and then to end a meeting, my favorite motion. So I think what it's problematic at is for shutting down meaningful conversations. I just kind of want to caution. There is a certain power of the chair to be able to really kind of curtail conversation and make people feel like they're not welcome, and it's just not worth it. I think that it's possible that Robert's Rules can be sort of an antithesis to the culture of a community council. You can be excluding people from engaging. And I think that it also can be used in a bullying manner by people that, feel like they have a better handle on it than others. And so I think, speaking to chairs or future chairs, I would encourage you to really think about, the greater good of a community council being engagement, participation, discussion. I think there's some other things to consider is kind of like this modified Robert's Rules, right? I'm borrowing heavily from a blog entry that was produced by the Foraker Group, and Mike Walsh gave me permission to use this, so I want to share it with you guys. If you can find it, and maybe we can email it afterwards too. But the blog entry is from 2023. It's called "Is Robert in the Room?" Robert in the Room. Is Robert in the Room? And this was produced by the Foraker Group. And I think that they do a good job of kind of holding loosely to Robert's Rules, to saying, there's bigger structural items that you should use Robert's rules for, and that's, running the agenda and getting motions passed. But there's also times to kind of consider letting Robert go. And so I think that this sort of points to the importance of the executive committee and the executive committee meeting. And I think that it's useful to have a less formalized executive committee meeting where you can the point of the executive committee meeting is to set the agenda. But I think that that's a good opportunity to talk about what the meat of the meeting is going to be, where the time allotment needs to be prioritized. And then sort of asking the executive committee, the board, if they think any more sort of effort ought to be spent on any single topic. The executive board is also pretty good at identifying new topics, new items of business, so you can get things on the agenda in advance and invite speakers. There's, I guess, two other spaces I think that Robert's Rules lacks is an opportunity for just real community education. And so as a community council leader, this is a space where you can be intentional about who you're bringing in for speakers and getting them on the agenda in advance. If there is a motion or a resolution that's being presented that requires subject matter expertise, trying to get a subject matter expert in the space before everybody has an opinion about what they heard. And then really trying to get to the why and hold the why of the meeting, which is to have that engagement, is to have the community dialogue, is to have the growth as a group. A couple things I've done in the 2 times I've rewritten bylaws for community councils is distinguish between sort of motions and resolutions. And this is, I think, as much style as anything, but I really think that a resolution has more gravity than a motion. A motion could, we could have a motion right now, and it could be, somebody moves that Harry stops speaking, somebody else seconds it, call for a vote, and it's unanimous. But it doesn't include the people online. It doesn't include the people that didn't know that I was going to be speaking on Robert's Rules, and they've been waiting so long. So I think that that's where kind of a resolution is useful. To me, a resolution is more of, instead of the sense of the people in the space at that time, it's more of a sense of the community. And the way we've structured that in Fairview, and we restructured it in South Addition, was that by our bylaws, you cannot introduce and pass a resolution in the same night. You have to bring that to a subsequent agenda. Now, as a chair, you have the prerogative to sort of make that happen. You could take a motion and give it to a committee, or give it to an ad hoc, or take it to the executive committee and say that we need to massage this a little bit, we need to talk about it next month. I think it's nice to have it in the bylaws because, people are always insistent that, their thing is emergent or urgent. And in those circumstances, it's nice to be able to say, well, okay, if it's emergent, then let's make a motion. And the motion is that the board chair writes a letter saying that the sense of the body that night was that I needed to write a letter to so-and-so. But if it's something that really deserves more dialogue, like for example, we had somebody in Fairview suggest that we ought to have a real deep conversation about the purpose of having fluoride in our water. I don't know anything about fluoride. I don't know anything about our water system. I'm pretty sure it's a good idea, but I don't know. And so, we postponed that. We allowed an expert to come. We had a robust dialogue on it and ultimately resolved that fluoride in the water system is probably a pretty good idea. There was disagreement, but because we had an opportunity to invite an expert, because we had opportunity to tell the community that this was about to happen and it could be consequential, because we paused and were invitational to that dialogue, I think we ended up with a better result. So our resolutions are not able to be introduced and passed in the same night. Distinguishable from a motion, which could be done quickly. So our last South Edition Community Council meeting, there was an issue that arguably is emergent. We cannot wait a month. We don't have all the information. So we passed a motion saying the chair is going to write a letter saying the sense of the body this night is that we ought to write a letter. And then the resolution was postponed to the next meeting per our bylaws. We'll talk about it next week at our executive committee meeting. We'll massage it a little bit. We'll try to figure out who is the right person to invite to our meeting to speak on that matter. And then at our November meeting, we'll be able to have a better dialogue with more people who will care about it because it'll be posted on the agenda. It'll be noticed to the community. There'll be an expert in the space, and the people that care will have the opportunity to be in the room. So I think that that's sort of the concept of the modified Robert's rules, right? To use the best parts of Robert's rules, but also acknowledge that Robert's rules isn't great for what we're trying to accomplish, which I think is being invitational, being community oriented, and honoring our neighbors and giving them opportunity to participate. There's a lot more to this, and unfortunately, you did not have a lawyer up here who would have, had vastly different opinions, I think, on a lot of this. Ultimately, it's up to the council on what rules you want to use. Look at your bylaws and look at the powers of the chair in those bylaws, and make sure the chair has the ability to, allow the meeting to go outside of the Robert's Rules box when necessary, and then I think consider whether Robert's Rules in and of itself is the right thing at the right moment for the dialogue you're having. So with that, I'll yield.
Just another round of applause for Harry. Thank you so much. Next, we have John Weddleton. Because of his background attending community councils in every form, resident, business owner, landowner, representative, and presenter, I knew John could really help us understand everyone who participates in council meetings and the important cross-section that occurs there. John Weddleton moved to Anchorage in 1987 after a life traveling across the country and world, including several years in Istanbul, Lugano, and 5 years as a dry cabin dweller in Fairbanks. John started his work career as an economic consultant. He now owns a retail business with 2 locations and some commercial properties. John went to a community council meeting in 1997 and things got out of hand. Through his homes and businesses, he has been a member of 9 community councils. He was chair of Mid-Hillside Community Council, chair of Hillside's Home and Landowners Organization, and on the board of the Abbott Loop Community Council. His community involvement includes numerous citizen advisory groups, including school district budgets, transportation studies, trails planning, park planning, utility routing, and the Hillside District Plan. He served as on the Anchorage Assembly from 2016 to 2021. Welcome, John.
Unlike Harry, all those community councils, I never rewrote the bylaws. Sorry. Well, thanks. So, I define myself as a community council guy. I've had lots of roles in the community, but the root is community councils. And my first community council, I was in Sand Lake and had a baby on the way, bought a house. So you go, gosh, I guess I'm rooted in the community or something, right? It's a revelation. And I started, looking around and somehow stumbled into community councils. And I went to the Sand Lake Community Council and it was a little drab. I figured, okay, I'll give it another shot. I went a second time and it was still a little drab, but I gave one more shot. Third time, Andrew Hawkrow was chair all of a sudden. And if you know Andrew, he's a lot of fun. And this was a lively meeting. Holy smokes, this is all right. I can stand this. And I remember assembly member, Faye Von Gemmingen, came up and she's giving a report and he didn't like something she had done and he was just ragging on her. And I'm going, you could do that? She's on the assembly. You can't do that. I don't think it's illegal. And, but he did. And it was like, it was pretty cool. But the next topic, they're friends. They're together on it. They talk about it. So it was, back and forth like this. And it was not mean-spirited where he was critiquing a decision she had made. But it really showed me, okay, there's something special about this type of a group that we have. And, we haven't, and no one said it tonight, but it's like anytime you talk about community council, you should say, we're in the charter as part of, not technically city government, but part of the process. And we are in code as part of the process many times. And it's for maximum citizen involvement and self-determination. We the people, this is very fundamental to be an American. And I have here, he forgot his treasure box, but I know Kathy has a treasure box. We all get treasure boxes. So there you go. I have prompts. So community councils are very much part of American culture and we all take part. So it's a great thing and it's a big part of my life. So what do you do at a community council? That's my role. It overlaps quite a bit with what Harry had said. And one thing, typically they don't follow Robert's rules, they follow Bob's rules, which is kind of the informal Robert's rules, which is kind of nice. But it really varies. Of all the community councils, they all have a different flavor. My favorite place to have meetings, Baskin Robbins, 31 flavors. Some are very small. They are disorganized. They don't hit obvious topics that they should. And it can be a little frustrating. Those can drag on or they can be very brief because nothing happens. And others are incredibly dynamic. I think South Addition is dynamic in the area, Hillside area where I've been most involved. Rabbit Creek is amazing. They can have easily 50 people at a typical meeting. And they have educated people on all things, how the city government works, debating different issues. And it's very lively and issues get tossed back and forth and just things move ahead. When decisions are made there, it's after being thoroughly vetted or discussed at any rate. So they're all very different. And of course, there's different topics. I was chair of the Hillside Community Council for 5 years. And I would kind of distressed initially because I couldn't get a crowd. I mean, we'd have 5, maybe 10 people would be a big crowd. And why is that? Was I doing bad? I thought I was doing bad. But in fact, there weren't big issues in Mid-Hillside. We didn't have liquor stores. We didn't have extra development. It was all the same zoning. It pretty much built out. So there just typically weren't big issues. So I got to the point where the goal was not necessarily to have big meetings, but to be there when something, keep it going, functioning well. So when something big did happen, you were there to deal with it. And I'll get work to some cases where we dealt with some things that the community council structure really was very helpful to do. The high points of community councils are where you have someone, it's well run, like Harry was describing, you have a chair who keeps people on track and make sure anyone who came gets to speak, or at least you draw them out, because everybody took some of their time out of their evening to come to this meeting. They should have a right to speak, and people might be nervous, might be their first meeting, they don't know, or they're just bashful. But if you go, so miss, you came here this evening, there must be something on your mind, tell us, we're here to hear or listen, and that'll draw people out typically, but a good chair should always do that. On any topic that you can, if you have an issue, say a ballot measure, people come to speak, both sides should be there. And when I was chair, there were times where I would just not have that issue on there if I couldn't get both sides. You want to have a good balanced presentation. And usually you can get people to speak on both sides, but you want to really draw that out as a chair. So the better community councils tend to do that. So what goes on at a community council, just broadly? And Harry went through the agenda, which is pretty typical. You get, you might go through committee reports, and committees can be on any of the variety of things that community councils look at. Liquor licenses, might be a liquor license, marijuana license committee. There might be a Title 21 land use committee, fundraising committee, whatever it might be. Outreach, let's get someone under 40 in this room, committee. They'll do those reports, and those tend to go pretty quick if it's a well-run meeting. And most of the work on those committees is done outside of the monthly meeting or whatever the community council does. And then you get into typically presentations by different groups. And as Harry said, you might get. Fire department very often comes, police department, I have one of my treasures. I really like this. It's one of my favorite things I got. So, but they'll come and you put them first because they might have to go all of a sudden. I was meeting with this new reporter here this morning, and we let the fire department folks ahead of us, and they got called out for a heart attack. So we got to go. But, you just have to account for that. They have really important stuff to do. Talk to you later. So you'll go through that, and that is an opportunity for people to get to know what do these people do. Particularly if the police come, the fire department, what do they do? You think putting out fires, are there fires anymore? Not that many. Mostly what they're doing is going to do medical things, and they can really tell you about some of their frustrations, how they can pick someone up and then they fall down and they go get them 6 hours later, take them, and it's just knowing the reality of their job is really important, and same with the police. So it's an opportunity, and anyone at these meetings, you should take that opportunity to just drop them questions, say what makes your job hard, and, what makes it easy? What can we do to make it easier? How's life? And that's an important part of being in the community, is knowing what these first responders are up to. So then typically you move on to the elected officials. And this can be an interesting dynamic in the community council. Typically they'll go through and they'll just talk about what they're working on a little bit. And then they go to the next one. I mean, some like Abbott Loop, there we had four assembly members, some representing that area, and you'd have several legislators would come and they could talk a little bit. So what do you do with that opportunity when an assembly member is there? Well, you can listen to what they're saying, but ask them questions. Why that? What else is going on? Do you have anything planned? What's coming forward? Just you get to know them, which is really nice in this community. But we should really be trying to draw them out instead of just purely on the report. And I know, my time on the assembly, I'd have some key highlights that I would be doing. But what I found community councils to be very valuable for, and we don't see this as much as I think we should from assembly members, is I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think about it? And you're trial ballooning your ideas in front of the community and help you develop it before you, instead of, I put this ordinance on there, it's for introduction and the public hearings in 2 weeks, right? I mean, that's like, you're so far along by the time you did that. Starting really at the basics, it really is what community councils can offer. And early in my experience was on the Hillside Community Council, and Janice Schamberg was on the assembly, and she worked it this way. When she had a notion to do something, she would come early and talk about it and try to get feedback. And if anyone seemed interested, she would hook you in and start making you part of the process. And I got dragged into undergrounding electrical power lines. I don't know anything about that, but I sure knew a lot 3-4 months later. And I knew a lot about how that process went. So I don't see that much from assembly members, but that's something, if you're at the community council meeting, you could draw that out and try to get more of that from the assembly members. Similarly with legislators, we're part of city government, so the assembly seems like it's more core to what we do, but we're never far from our legislators either. And it's good to get to know them. They, on the Hillside, some legislators work like at a community council level, others don't, they're way up here. And we've got some, the current people in the legislature are very strong that way, working with community councils and getting things done. I tried for 15 years to get a crossing across O'Malley for O'Malley Elementary. No luck at all, but we need to get legislators involved. And the Hillside Community Council did do that recently, and now there's progress on that. So, and it came from community council meetings, getting to know them. They got to know the issues. Things started happening, and that seems so fundamental, isn't it? A safe crossing for students to get to school. It takes so long to do, but through the community council, that is what happened. So it's a real opportunity having our elected officials there. Then after that happens, there's usually discussion on a variety of different things. And community councils there are community meetings required for many things in our code. If there's a rezone, if there's a replat, some replats, a site plan review, new marijuana operation or new liquor store, they're required to have a community meeting. And the first choice for that community meeting should be the community council, where they would come and present. It doesn't have to be in depth, but typically they will. show you what this issue is. And if that's on the agenda, hopefully you'll draw out the neighbors of it who might have an opinion. Maybe not though. And some of the better community councils, and it's not knocking, it's all volunteer, have gone out, like put flyers on the doors near this, new rezone or wherever there was a marijuana shop or whatever it might be, to let them know. Yeah, they should get a mailing anyway, but this is like a separate notice, and get them to the meeting to discuss these things. But community councils are part of that and can actually be fairly influential. When I first started, I thought, well, we could comment on this, but we really don't have any power over it at all. But the different groups that come to talk to the community councils really want community council opinion. They got to do this meeting and they want your support, right? So they want something, yeah, we're okay with this, okay? And if you're not, tell me why so I can deal with it and we'll do something to fix that problem. So it's surprising how much community councils, dispassionately run, thoughtful, can have on the different things that come forward to them. So those are just broad community issues that are in the code that can come forward. Another really important part of community councils is responding to ordinances that the assembly puts forward. So the process there is an assembly member will, when it's done well, have an ordinance. This is a proposal, a change in the law, and they'll put it forward and it's introduced. So at one meeting, say this coming Tuesday, they introduce something, and that's like waving a flag saying, hey, this is coming, we've been working on this, and we're gonna set a public hearing for it. It can be as soon as 2 weeks later. Could be 4, could be 8, could be months later. You don't have to do it really fast unless it's some emergency thing, and it rarely is. So that's their introduction. So community councils really have a role and should be notified for most types of ordinances to comment on these things. Well, if you meet monthly and it's introduced for 2 weeks later, what are the odds you can comment on it? 0. You can't comment sensibly after a good thought and research on it. If it's 4 weeks later, 2 meetings later, it's still going to be really hard. And you have pretty much shut yourself out of the process if you do the sensible thing that Harry pointed out, where you would introduce a resolution or create it and you'll vote on it at the next meeting. That is very reasonable to do that. So that you draw the community in, you have a real discussion about this that's fair and representative, as representative as you can be. You can't do that if it's 2 weeks or 4 weeks for the public hearing. So what do? You react from the seat of your pants, you react quick, and most likely that is going to be what, Kathy? No. I don't support this. I don't support it because I don't understand it. I haven't had time to look at it, so my answer is no. So now community councils are the community of no. So you get written off. You're just saying no to everything. That's all they do. They're not positive parts of developing the city. They just say no. But it's self-created by a process where introduction and they set a public hearing for 2 weeks or 4 weeks later. Anything less than 2 months largely cuts out the process that Harry described. So that's a challenge. And it takes one just to be on it at all. You have to read those. Someone in your community council has to always read every agenda that comes out, then read it, not just Wednesday, but on Friday or Saturday when the addendum items where they add critical things sometimes, and then watch on Tuesday for when they lay something on the table that you can't know or see until it's published 10 days later. Okay, it takes a lot of attention. It's very, very hard, but it's so critical for community councils to be involved with ordinances that change the laws of our city. And it's a tough fight. I don't have a great solution. The solution's in the other room over there when the assembly members introduce items and participate in a public process or they don't. So I guess that's a little negative, but if you do have a good comment on it, your influence can be pretty profound. If you have a real thoughtful, productive comment on it. We find this a great thing because it supports our plan in these ways. So we totally support it. Thank you so much for putting it forward. Or you say, well, we think this is well directed. However, these points work against things that we've worked for as this community, things we have supported this community. So we'd like to see these changes, something like that, where it's well thought out. Then you're a very productive part of the process. And community councils do that. I mean, Rabbit Creek simplest ordinance, they can take a 2-page ordinance, put 5 pages of comments on it, and they're all well thought out and documented throughout all our plans and so on. So community councils do that, but it is a huge amount of work, and you have to have absolute dedicated people involved in community council. And I know many of you are in that lot. So that's part of it. Another thing that we doing on time. We good? Oh, I have to wrap up real quick. Okay, a couple of things that are not so much thought of as community council things, but community councils would be very effective as a forum for discussing neighborhood issues. And I think I'll just hit maybe one real quick then. And that is, that's why I brought my ski pole. Someone years ago skiing along was mad that there were horses on a multi-use trail and poked that horse with his ski pole. Ski poles are very small. Skiers are very small. Horses are really big. So that was a really dumb, besides being mean, it was a really dumb idea. But we had this war started between horse riders and skiers, and there was no place for them to talk or communicate or figure out what are we going to do. So Hillside Community Council drew them in. We went to the different stables. We said, horse people come talk to us, skier people come and talk to us. We had a pretty full room and we had a discussion. And one thing that Harry had mentioned, you can get this crossways discussion can devolve. And one way to try to prevent that is say, no, you're talking only to me. So talk to me, not to anyone else in the room. So make your point to me. And then to make your point, then you go to the next person. But make sure if it's a tense situation, they talk just to you. But we just gave a forum where they could talk. And things worked out. I haven't heard anything for over a decade where there's been a real conflict between the horse riders and the trail. So they said, we tell our people to be more careful, scoop maybe a little bit. Skiers, no, that's multi-use. They're allowed there. Just get that communication going. So community councils can be very effective on that. You hear a community issue, like draw them in, create the forum where you can have that discussion. So those are, so dealing with the committees, dealing with the different issues that have to come to you, working with your elected officials, and then looking at community issues and just trying to work something out, totally independent of the rest of city government. Community councils are very well suited for that. And you can improve your neighborhood, improve the city through that process. So anyway, well, thank you so much. I have other treasures we can go by after, but we have more time. We'll go through it again.
Just gonna move this out of the way. Thank you, John Whittleton, everyone. And if we could collect any cards, we're gonna jump right into the Q&A. You guys have your mics, you know how to turn them on?
I have a mic.
You have a mic? Amazing. We're checking.
So Harry, how did you get duped into writing so many bylaws? We all want to know.
When you read these things and they're just stocked full of imprecise terms and poor grammar, it gets a little tough to try to wade through it. And sometimes it's just more efficient to fix it than it is to try to negotiate what various interpretations are of it. And then I do feel strongly about that resolution thing, that I kind of try to get that in. And that was a big lift in South Edition. People did not appreciate that at first. And I think it started to grow on people once they realized that a resolution that's introduced and passed in the same night is basically a strongly written letter.
No, I'm going to move on. John, you were in councils long before you ran for assembly. I think something that's not often talked about is how councils can be a training ground for our next generation of representatives. Can you talk at all about if councils provided any training and or anything that you took with you to the assembly?
Yeah, community councils were a huge amount of training, learning how to deal with a whole variety of people who think very differently from me and getting to a good spot where I learned and maybe they learn, and learning how city government works. And it's so much so that, when people run for the assembly, if they have no community council experience, they won't get my vote. If they have not shown even that little bit of commitment that they would join a community council and learn how that works, they have not earned the right to be on the assembly. So I made some allowances actually for people who have been within city government and policy making places, because they're embracing the same kind of stuff. But yeah, for me, you better be in the community council. You don't get my vote.
So I think I've gotten a couple questions about Zoom and hybrid meetings. Can you guys talk at all about your experience, in this, we're post-COVID, not post-COVID world, what it means to be online when it comes to councils, and also I think some councils have remained in person, some have gone just to Zoom, some are doing hybrid. Like, what has that been like for you guys? Do you have any feedback or advice for councils?
So pre-COVID, I was in Fairview, and it was all in person. Occasionally, we would have folks calling in, especially when we had representatives in Juneau. And so that was sort of like before we all got used to Zoom, before Zoom became a verb. Well, I guess it's always been a verb, but before it became the verb we know it as now. We were having representatives calling in and putting a mic next to the phone and then fielding questions in the room and trying to get the person on the phone to be able to understand what the dialogue was in the room. And so, this isn't new. I mean, we've been doing this for a long time. We've all had representatives calling in from Juneau to our community council meetings for years. So I think that the thing that's harder now is, and then let me pivot to, in South Addition, it was COVID and then post-COVID, so we were always on Zoom. And we just started back in person at this last meeting. We just had our summer break and went back to in person, and are dabbling in the hybrid. So the
successfully, I might add, for those of you who are in person and considering doing hybrid, our office is here to help.
Yeah, and super supportive also. In fact, sent a staff person to help us. Thank you. But the nice thing about the Zoom was that we had so much more participation. People were participating, while doing their dishes after dinner and, or before they had, left their office. And so we were able to get a lot more folks involved or logging on and putting it on mute and taking care of their kids. And this is one of the problems with community councils is that we're built to accommodate a 9-to-5 working schedule where you then get home at a reasonable time and have dinner and then can go to a meeting, and that's not practical for, I've argued to say, a majority of our neighbors. And so the Zoom really broadened it. So I have a lot of hope for these hybrid meetings. I think that what we learned in our first meeting, hybrid, was kind of embracing the pause, allowing a moment for a dialogue to stop and then kind of looking around, making sure the dialogue had actually stopped. Waiting, like waiting 10 seconds in a public meeting feels excruciating. But and then making sure there's no more dialogue on Zoom or some lagged response. We had a couple mistakes where there was a vote and everybody agreed, and then somebody had a question on Zoom. Well, the vote had already happened, and that's our fault for not waiting and saying, "Hey, is there anything else on Zoom before we go to the vote?" And so, I think that's it's a learning curve. It's not impossible, and the Federation has been super supportive. So thank you.
And the Federation hosts Zoom meetings, and I would say you got to have somebody who's your Zoom person, the person in person who is going to monitor that and help facilitate that conversation. And then you have really successful meetings when, whether it's your secretary or your vice chair who's paying attention to that. John, I didn't want to skip you.
The Zoom meetings drive me absolutely crazy, but it's absolutely a better way to do it. You get more people in, make it easier for people to participate. So I just got to learn to live with it.
I might add on the Robert's Rules and Bylaws bit is that if you are interested, you should look at your bylaws and make sure that you have the ability to have electronic votes. And so, this is yet another reason to update your bylaws.
Right.
To ensure that you have the ability to record a vote electronically.
Right. And what I would say for bylaws is if they don't say you can't, then you can. So it has to be explicitly written out generally for there to be a no on the electronic votes. But Alaska state law is that they have to be done simultaneously. So essentially, like you can't have
Contemporaneously.
contemporaneously. So you can't have somebody on the chat voting. It has to be like all the people in person and all the people on the Zoom, unless your bylaws say otherwise. So
The other rub is that I know our Fairview bylaws the way you establish quorum is by signing in. And so you had to sign in, right? So then you had to kind of have a creative interpretation on what does it mean to sign into a meeting. And it's worth a look.
yeah, totally. And maybe we should have a follow-up training. Okay, question. Voting on an item often requires a notification of a vote in the agenda. If the agenda fails to include notice that the item is to be voted on and the vote is held anyway, and the item passes, is the vote invalid?
So I attended enough law school to know the answer to that is maybe. It depends on what your bylaws stipulate. Motions can be made and passed in the same evening, and a lot of communities do resolutions that are introduced and passed in the same evening. It depends if your bylaws require to have notice. In the case of a resolution, in South Addition and Fairview, by our bylaws, that you would have to notice that because it would be in the agenda. Now then the question is, what is a notice, right? So it used to be that we would have mailers and we'd have, there would be some sort of formal publication, and like now it's just a website. And so then it's like, is that really notice? Or, do you need to get it on your Facebook and your Nextdoor and your LinkedIn in order for it to be public notice? And so, and who, is spending their free time just looking at community council websites to see what the next agenda is going to be. And so, it's a tricky thing. And I think you just kind of get back to the heart of the issue, which is who needs to know. And, if you want everybody to know, if you want it to be a strong resolution, you have as much time for that resolution to breathe and invite and engage as possible.
Yeah. John, in that same question, or in that same vein, when you were on the assembly, did you find that you were checking resolutions at all for how many people, like when you got a resolution, what did you do with that information?
There was a change that Dick Cheney put forward probably 7 or 8 years ago that required resolutions from community councils to show how many people were in attendance and what the vote was, because you would get resolutions that did not include that, and you go over 3 people there. I would kind of weigh that, but I had a little different approach to it. Is I just listened and looked for good ideas, and it comes from one person who lives in a different state, and it's a good idea that we can use. I'm going to listen. And if it comes from 40 people to community council and a unanimous resolution, good idea, I'm going to listen. So it's a way of gathering information and ideas was kind of the way I viewed it. So I didn't discount it. Would I say if it's just a handful of people, especially if I knew the community council, I might weigh it differently. But I would say, sometimes community councils are discounted because it's just a few people. They're not representative of the community. Mm-hmm. What you have in a community council is the best and the brightest. You have the people who know the community the best. So typically, given enough time to respond sensibly, you're going to get good thoughts on it, even if it's just a few people.
Yeah. We have a question that's kind of off topic, but I think is still salient. Community council meetings seem to be made for long-term residents who are entrenched in the community. Is there a place for more transient residents, such as military members who may only be here for a few years at community council meetings? How do you view their role in the process? Either of you?
I think my experience in Fairview is that, we have a lot of renters in Fairview. And because of that, we have a fairly high turnover of our neighbors. I always thought that there was a place for them. They're definitely members under the bylaws. You know, if you're a resident, then you're a member. If you're a homeowner, you're also a member. So, you know, we would have non-resident members, but to me, they were never distinguishable. I never asked whether they'd been there for X years or not. I think that they probably did not participate at as high of a level as the long-term residents. That being said, I'm already thinking about 2 or 3 that got onto the executive board, and we were glad to have them. Now, I think another interesting aspect of that question is the non-resident people who are living in our neighborhoods now, and like, so how are the unhoused being represented in our communities, and where do they bring their voice, or how could they bring their voice, because they're not listed as members under our bylaws, and so, you know, there's a deeper aspect to that.
I do think I can think of one council that might have changed their bylaws to accommodate for our neighbors without addresses.
You know, I agree with Harry. I mean, anyone who meets the qualifications is totally welcome to community council. I don't know any community council chair or board member who doesn't want more people to come in for a broader representation of the community. It's just part of who people drawn to community councils are. I think it tends to be people who feel more established and rooted in the community. It certainly was my case, you know, bought a house, had a kid on the way, time to get rooted. But it'd be nice to get more people who would feel comfortable and welcomed.
Yeah, and at the beginning of this, I spoke about the FCC's mission. 2 of our mission goals are outreach and training. And, you know, this is in the training, but it's also in the outreach, is reaching people who aren't aware of councils. And I think that our residents who don't own property or don't own businesses are often the ones who don't know that they can participate. And that's one of our goals, is to reach people who aren't aware of councils. Yeah.
Just an additional thought. This kind of harkens back to the previous conversation about you know, the structure of these and the timing of these is built for people that have traditional sort of 8 to 5 schedules. And I would say that, you know, our population that rents, or our military population, are probably predisposed to having non-traditional work schedules.
Yeah.
And so, to the extent, I mean, you know, one of the things we ought to think about is how do we broaden, you know, that invitation to participate to something beyond a 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. format.
Right. Okay, just really quickly to wrap us up, what are you most proud of accomplishing when you were on a community council, other than changing bylaws?
Other than changing bylaws?
Yeah, other.
Gosh, I mean, so you know, the Fairview neighborhood plan was the culmination of 30 years of dialogue.
Wow.
You know, like, and there were 4 or 5 generations in the room when we finally passed it. Some of them had seen it up from its inception, right? And like, but you know, that's the sort of thing that, you know, it really changes a neighborhood. And it allows us to agree on the why and the what, and start taking a step towards the how.
Yeah. John.
Looking at it 2 different ways. One is when I started at the Hillside Community Council, I had no idea how to run a meeting. I barely knew what a community council was. And all of a sudden, I'm the only one there. And I figured, oh my goodness, what do I do? And 5 years later, I had a full board. It was functioning like a normal community council should. And I thought it was pretty cool. And then I left it in the good hands of Lance Powell. But likewise, you know, something that community councils can do, it's very important, is help with their area plans. And the Hillside District Plan was very much a citizen-driven effort with hundreds of people involved with it. It's a good plan that stands over decades now, or will. And it is the work plan for HALO, which is not a community council, but somewhat similar to it, and to the other community councils. It had those implementation steps are what HALO works towards. So, and that's felt good. And for me, I was on the Citizens Committee, then I was on the Planning Commission when I went through there. And then not on the assembly, but real active in the assembly. So it was a lifestyle for me for 10 years.
And I will plug, Girdwood is the closing tale of their area plan. Eagle River Chukiak is in a transportation study at the beginning of their plan. And District 2 is also in the middle of early conversations for what their plan looks like. So if you live in any of those areas, chances to get your voice heard. Before we end for the evening, I just want to remind everybody that our last session for 2024 is November 18th, another Monday, here at the library at 7 p.m. We're doing guiding community council meetings. If this series has inspired you to get involved and maybe even join your council's board, but you don't know how to begin, our speakers will be there to answer your questions about leading a room full of diverse opinions. Also, if you wanted the handouts and you are online, there should be a link to them in the description for the video. And there's also a link to a survey. I would love to get feedback about what you like and didn't like so that I can use that to ask for more funding for more training next year. So give us some feedback, help me keep this going. We did not end early, which is very like a community council meeting of us. I just want to say thanks again to our speakers, the Anchorage Assembly, the Municipal Ombudsman. Thank you to the library for hosting us, and thank you all for being here. Remember, be the voice in your neighborhood. Thank you.